go ahead and start with lesson 10, which is going to look into using advanced formulas. Okay. So if you remember previously, we looked into using some basic formulas. In this lesson, we're going to look into using some more advanced formulas, such as sum if, count if, average if. We're going to also look into operational, logical operational functions, such as if, and, or. And we're going to look into using formulas to modify our text and using functions such as right, left, mid, upper, lower, proper, and we're also going to be joining text together using the concatenate function as well.
Hello, Sasan.
Hello.
You're not sharing your screen. I can't see it.
Oops, sorry about that.
Oh, please, can you go over again, please?
Thank you. Yep, so like I mentioned, we're going to be going over the sum if, count if, average if, some logical operation functions, and some functions to modify our text, okay? So again, most of the exercises that we'll be doing in this lesson 10, we'll be looking into using the formula tab here, okay? So using formulas to conditionally summarize data. So conditional formulas add another dimension to data analysis by summarizing data that meets one or more criteria. So a criteria can be a number, text, or expression that tests which cells to sum, count, or average. A conditional formula is a conditional formula is one which the result is determined by the presence or absence of a particular condition. And conditional formulas used in Excel include the functions, for example, such as SUMIF, COUNTIF, and AVERAGEIF that check for one criterion, and the counterpoints, SUMIFs, COUNTIFs, and AVERAGEIFs can check for multiple criteria. So if you are checking against one criteria, you would use, for example, COUNTIF. If you're checking against multiple criteria, you would use COUNTIFs, that which has an S at the end of it, okay? So that's how you distinguish between the two. So the summer function. So the summer function calculates the total of only cells that meet a given criterion or condition. The syntax for the summer function is SUMIF, then you specify the range, then the criteria, then the sum range. The values that a function uses to perform operation or calculations in a formula are called arguments. So arguments of the SUMIF function are range, criteria, and sum range. So cells within the range do not meet the criterion are not included in the total. Okay, so only things that you that are in that range will get included in that total. So if you use the number in the range for the sum range argument is not required. If you are using the criteria to test which values to sum from a different column, then the range becomes the tested value, and the sum range determines which numbers to total in the same rows as the matching criteria. Okay, so let's look into first using the SUMIF function. Now to use the SUMIF function, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the formula tab here, and in the function library command group, we are going to, what we can do is, so as you remember previously, we can either type our function in here or we can import it from here. So we can either type in equals SUMIF, or we can add it through here through the maths and trig, and you should find one that says SUMIF. So SUMIF, okay. Oops. And then once you double click on and open that, you will notice a dialog box open. Now, if you do this via this way and just simply type in SUMIF, you'll notice that the dialog box does not appear, but there is a way around it to make it appear, and you can do that. So once you've typed that in, SUMIF brackets open, where it says fx here, and if you hover over it, it should say insert function. If you click where it says fx, it will then open the dialog box for the SUMIF function. Okay. Now for this SUMIF function, what we're going to do is we're going to specify a range for it. So this is the selected cells or type range to be evaluated by the criteria. So in this case, we're going to select, for example, C5 to C16. Okay, so this is our range. Okay, and we're going to say sum all the values in that range only if they are greater than 200,000. Okay, and if we click OK, if you pay attention to this cell here, you'll notice that it updates that cell and it calculates that value for us based on the criteria that we gave it. So it's done sum of the sales over 200,000. So we specified the range and then the criteria, and it's done this the sum of all the criterias in and over that range. Okay. Again, we can also use some ifs if we have more than one criteria. Okay, so to do so, what we can do is if we let's go into this cell below it, and if we type in equal sum ifs with the s at the end, click tab, open up our dialog box. Again, we're going to get this same dialog box. So here it will say sum range. So let's select our range again, which is C5 to C16. And then the criteria range, okay? So if you look at this text here, is we're looking for, if I just do that again, so we're looking to do a sum of the properties that solve for a percentage difference of less than 3%, okay? So we have multiple criteria in this one, okay? So equals sum ifs tab, open up the dialog box for from the insert function again. So here to select our range, what we can do is we can also select on this up arrow here and then go ahead and select our range. So again, C5 to C16 and then expand it again. And then the first criteria range is going to be F5 to F16. Okay, so F5 to F16. And then we're going to do for, so this is for houses that are on the market for less than 60 days. Okay, 60 days. And then here, so this is where we specified our first criteria. Well, then we're going to go ahead and specify our second criteria, okay? So the second range for this criteria is going to be E5 to E16, okay? And the criteria for this one is going to be, we're going to do all the properties that have a percentage difference of greater than 3%, okay? So as you've noticed now, we have two criterias that we are testing our range against. So if they've been on the market greater than 60 days, so and if the percentage difference is greater than 3% as well, okay? And if we click OK, and if you pay attention again to this cell, you'll notice that it's done the calculation of the sum of the properties that was sold for a percentage greater than 3% or less than 3%, so we did greater than 3% in this case, and it only did the that's the sum of that for only houses that have been on the market for greater than 60 days. Okay.
That's a question.
Yes.
I know you have explained before. So the sum if is only when there's only one criteria, and sum ifs is when there's more than one criteria. Is that what?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So for example, in this case, in the first time you sum if it was sum of sales over 200,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just one criteria. I get it.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So if we go ahead and click on this cell, if we open the dialog box for it, you can see that we only have one criteria here, and we're only checking for some of the sales that are over 200,000. So that's our only criteria. But again, if we go on this one and check the criteria for this, that we can see that what we're checking for first is houses that are being on the market for less than 60 days, and also houses that are less than in the market for less than 60 days, and the percentage difference is less than 3% as well. So that's two criteria that we're checking for.
So how do you add the two different criteria? I mean,
so if I just delete this.
Yeah, please.
Actually, let's do this again. So let's go through this again. So again, so what we do is we type in equal sum
If.
if,
Yep.
yeah, and then tab, and then we can open the dialog box
Okay.
from here.
Okay.
And you'll notice here it only has two available
Yeah.
cells for me to type in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is first thing I'm going to do is select my sum range, which I mentioned previously is
Yeah.
C5 to C16. And if you pay attention, as soon as I click on this field here, it will add an additional one after it, okay? By
Okay.
itself. So this is automatic, okay? See?
Okay. Right.
So it added, as soon as I clicked in that field, it added an additional field after it for me. So
Sure.
I didn't do anything for that to happen. It just
Okay.
automatically did that,
Yeah.
okay?
Okay.
And then, so this is for our first criteria. So it says criteria range 1 and criteria 1. So again, we're going to select the range for our first criteria. So F5 to F16.
Yeah.
And if you pay attention again, as soon as I click in the criteria box, it's then underneath it, it's going to add an additional box again.
Yeah.
So by
Okay.
itself, okay?
Yeah, that was my confusion because I could not see any other button or click where you added these additional criteria. I get it. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I wasn't really clicking on anything additional. All I did was just click in that cell
Like,
and it just
okay.
added that cell automatically by itself. Again, same thing. As soon as I clicked in this one, it automatically added the other one as well.
And how many criteria can some ifs accommodate? Is it two criteria or more than that?
I think for the criteria, it's up to, if I remember correctly, it's up to yeah, you can do more than
More than two. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So again, so 3%. Okay, so it does that again for us, okay? So that is how the sum if and the sum ifs
Sure.
function work. So let's move on to, does anyone else have any questions about that? Hopefully that made sense. Okay, no questions? Okay, so now let's move on to the count if, okay? And the count ifs. So the count if function counts the number of cells given in a given range that meet a specific condition, okay? So unlike sum, which does a sum, count just counts the number of cells in a given range or criteria, okay? So the range is the range of cells to be counted by the formula, and the criteria are the conditions that must be met in order to, for the cells to be counted, okay? So if the criteria is not met, then they will not be counted essentially, okay? So what we can do is, again, same process. If we do same thing for count if, so we do count if, and then tab, and then let's click on this function option, and it will open this for us again, okay? For this, let's count, let's do B5 to B16. And here we're going to do any of those cells within that range that are greater than 200,000, we're going to go ahead and count them. Okay, so 200,000, 7. Okay, so 7 of these cells meet that criteria and are greater than 200,000, so therefore it outputs 7. So the number of properties listed for £200,000 or more is 7. Okay. Again, you would follow the same exact process that we did for some ifs, if you were going to do it for the count ifs as well. Okay, so it's the exact same process, but just the formula is different. That's it. Next thing we're going to move on to is average if. So the average function returns the arithmetic mean of all the cells in a range that meet a given criteria again. So like how sum and like how count worked, average also works in the same way, that it only work out the average of those cells that meet that given criteria that we give it, okay? So in the average if syntax, range is the set of cells that you want to average. For example, in this exercise, you use the average if function to calculate the number of days that a properties valued at £200,000 or more have been on the market before they were sold. Okay. So now let's look into doing this as well. So here, let's do equals average if, average if, again, open the dialog box for it. Let's select a B5 all the way down to B16 and criteria again. So here we want to work out, yeah, for values, houses over 200,000. So 200,000. And let's work out the average for us as well of those houses that are over £200,000 or $300,000. Okay, and again, you will follow the same process with average ifs. So the process for all of these, functions is essentially the same. So if you're just using count or count if, but with the count if or the count ifs, you're going to be able to use more criteria and test against more criteria. Okay, so you're refining your search and your formula. Again, there are exercises for all these formulas that I just went through. So count if with also images on how to do them. So please make sure you go through these exercises as well. So using formulas to look up data in a workbook. So when worksheets contain long lists of data, use the lookup functions to quickly find specific information. So lookup functions are an efficient way to search for and insert a value in a cell when the desired value is stored elsewhere in the worksheet or in even a different worksheet or workbook entirely. Okay, so we have two functions called VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. And these are two lookup functions that you can use. And these functions can return contents of the found cell. Okay, so the V stands for vertical. So this formula is used when the comparison value is in the first column of a table. So what Excel does, it essentially goes down the first column until a match is found, and then looks in one of the columns to the right to find a value in the same row. So the figure in the next slide shows a graphical explanation of the VLOOKUP function. So here we have some sort of table here. So when using the VLOOKUP function, essentially the first thing that it does, it goes vertically down the first column until there is a match with the lookup value. Okay, so it goes down the column first, and once it's found that specific match, it then goes over to the column index number. Okay, so say for example, if we typed in VLOOKUP, and first thing that we can do is, once we've typed in VLOOKUP, in the brackets, if we type in for example 5, it will then go all the way down in the columns until it finds 5. And here, if you notice that here we've specified that it is equal to 1.5%, it's going to go across the column indexes until it finds 1.5%. Okay, so it's going to look for a specific cell value by vertically going down the columns and rows until there's a match, and then it's going to go across to find that match that you specified. And there's also exercises on how to go through VLOOKUP. So please ensure you do those exercises. HLOOKUP is similar, but instead the H in this case stands for horizontal. So HLOOKUP searches horizontally for a value in the top row of a table or an array, and then it returns the value in the same column for row you specify in the table or array. So we can use HLOOKUP when the comparison values are located in a row across the top of the table of the data, and when you want to look in a specific row. Okay, so again, what HLOOKUP does, as I mentioned, it works horizontally. So what it's going to do is, if we say HLOOKUP feet and 3 is equal to 1,000, what it's going to do is HLOOKUP first goes across the first row until the match is found. Okay, so until the lookup underscore value is found. So in this case, it's being feet. So as you can see here, we've done HLOOKUP parentheses open feet. So it's going to go across these until it finds that criteria that we specified, and then it goes down to row index number until it reaches 1,000 and what we've specified for it to look for. Okay, so these are two functions that are quite useful to use if you're looking for specific things within your workbook or worksheets. And yep, there's also exercises on the HLOOKUP function as well. Okay, so moving on to if. So some of you may be familiar with logical operations. So you have, for example, if, and, or, and the result of a conditional formula is determined by the state of a specific condition or answer to a logical question. So what the if function does is the if function sets up a conditional statement to test data. So an if formula returns value if the condition you specify is true and another value is false. Okay, so the if function uses the following syntax. So we first specify the logical test, then we specify if the value is true and if the value is false. Okay, so you would essentially really use the if function if you are trying to, for example, in this case here, if you look at this table here, for example, we have some employee information, and here we have a goal achieved column. And for example, based on a certain criteria, we want to say, for example, if this person has met this criteria, their goal has been achieved. If their goal has been achieved, then output yes. If the goal has not been achieved based on that criteria, then output no. Okay, so that's how the if function would work. And you also have, so say for example here again, so if G5 is equal to yes, so if the condition is met, output yes, otherwise output no. Okay, so that's how the if function works. So if one thing is true and the other is false. So essentially one of the conditions has to be met for that if function to be executed. You then move on to the AND function. And what the AND function does is it returns true if all arguments are true. Okay, and if either one of those arguments is false, then it will return false. Okay, so if you have two, for example, criterias, both of those criterias need to be true for it to output a value, otherwise it will not output that value and it will be false. Okay, so again, there's exercises on here as well. And if you look here, so here, when you are specifying and using the AND function, like I mentioned, you can have multiple things that you can test against for them to be true. So say here, if we are looking to output some sort of value, in this example here, we have two things that we are testing against. Okay, so we have in logical 1 and logical 2. So both of these criterias have to be true for the function to also return true. If either one of those conditions are not met, then it will return a false. Okay, so that's how the AND function works. Okay, so like it says here, checks whether all arguments are true and returns true if all arguments are true. Okay, so here we have two arguments, and for it to return true, both of these arguments need to be also true. Same thing with the OR function. However, with an OR function, either one of those arguments can be true. Not both of them have to be true for it to return a true. So similar to how an OR gate works in electronics. If either one of those arguments are true, then the condition also returns true as well. Okay, so let's look into now modifying text. Okay, so when you get files from other people or programs, you often have to manipulate the data before you begin using it. Sometimes you receive files in a text format with comma separatings. Um, some text can be combined into a long string, and other text can be all in lower cases or upper cases. So in Excel, similar to programming, what you can do is you can use certain functions that will, for example, change the text that you have inside in the text that you have in a cell. You can change that to uppercase, lowercase. You can also concatenate two cells together, and similar to programming. So also Excel also provides these functionalities through their functions for you as well. Okay, so let's look at doing this. Okay, so let's look into modifying some text. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this. We're going to open 10 Fabricam alarm codes. So 10 Fabricam alarm codes, and you should see something like this. Now, if you notice here, these values are not in different cells, and you can check this by if you simply adjust the width of column A, you'll notice that this entire string is in one entire column, okay? And the same thing for all of the other ones, okay? So what we can do is we can select rows or cells A2 to all the way down to A8. And if we go to the data tab, and if we click wherever it says convert in the data tools command group where it says text to columns, you will notice here it will pop up with a dialog box for us with some options. So here it's going to say delimited or fixed width, so characters such as commas or tabs. So if you pay attention here, if we actually go off this again, so if you notice all of these, so in this string that we have here, certain values and words are separated by a comma. And this is the same for all of the other cells, okay? So if we just zoom out a bit, and if we highlight those cells again and click on text to columns, so we're going to select delimited because our values are separated by a comma. We're going to click next. And from these options here for the delimiters, we're going to select comma. Like I mentioned before, all of these values are separated by a comma. So here from this option, we're also going to select comma. And if you pay attention to this preview here, you will notice as soon as I click comma, it's going to also update this preview, and it's going to show how this data will look like.
Sasan, can you do it again, please, if you don't
Yes,
mind?
sure. So what you're going to do is, so say you have a worksheet like this, that the data is presented like this, okay? So simply what you're going to do is select on A2, hold and drag all the way down to A8. Yep. And then you are going to go to the data tab.
Yeah.
And in the data tools command group here, you're going to select where it says text to columns.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Once you see that, you're going to select the delimited.
Yep.
And from these options here for the delimiters, we are going to select comma. Okay. Because as you can see from the values here, our values are separated by commas. Okay. And once you select commas, you're going to see that our values are now nicely separated
Sure.
from one another. Okay. And what we can do is if you just simply click next and finish, it's going to separate all of those values that were previously in one entire string in neatly for us in separate columns based on where the comma was located at each one.
These are the CSV files you talk about, isn't it?
So for this one here that we
No,
imported,
I mean, all I'm saying these are the CSV files, the previous one, comma separated values, isn't it?
yes, so yes,
Okay.
exactly. So comma separated values, yeah.
Okay. So if you, when you're talking about delimited, one delimiter in the dialog box, there was one more option on that. Can you focus on that also, please?
So this one, so
And
let's go back on this.
yeah, fixed width.
So this one doesn't apply to us. So this one is fields that are aligned in columns with spaces between each field. But
Okay.
if you look at in this case here, if you look at our data, you'll notice that here, because we have commas, the
I get it.
data in these fields are separated by
Sure.
commas. So in this case, we are going to select the delimited one. But if this one meets your criteria and if the data that you're working with is like in this format, then you would select the fixed width one.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
But in this one, because we have commas separating each value, what we're going to do is select the delimited, comma,
Yeah.
and then next and finish. And it's going to nicely separate to those values for us based on where the comma was located. And now you can see everything is nicely arranged in different columns for us. Okay, so let's move on to using the left function. So that the left function evaluates a string and takes any number of characters on the left side of the string. Okay. So the format of the function is left and then parentheses open, text, and the number of characters. So the first string in the alarm data workbook contains employee phone extensions and floor number, which you extract by using the left function. Okay, so let's look into doing that. So if we just expand this a bit more, so in cell H1, what we're going to do is we're going to type in extension, exe for extension, and then in I1, we're going to type in floor. And then what we're going to do is we are going to select H2. And in the formulas tab, what we're going to do is we're going to go into where it says text. And here we're going to use the left function, okay? So you can simply type it in as well, but you can also import the left function here from here as well, okay? So from where it says text and then here where it says left, select that and you'll see a dollar box pop up, okay? Now for where it says text, choose, what we're going to do is we're going to select A2, A2, and for the number of characters, we're going to select 3, okay? And if you look at this preview here, it picked up that A2 was this cell here, and 3, the three first left characters of that cell are 4, 2, and 5. So if I click OK now, it's going to output 4, 2, 5. And if we try and do this for the other ones, we can simply use the drag handle and drag it down. And if you pay attention to here, 327 is now the first 3 characters of cell A3. So it's essentially picked up the first 3 characters to the left of that cell, okay? So that's how the left function works, okay? So now let's do using the right function. So the right function pretty much works in the exact same way. So type in birthday and then in cell K1, let's do employee ID and let's select cell J2 and let's go and use the right function this time. So again, we're going to text and select where it says right. Now in this one, we're going to select cell E2, E2. And so this is looking for the number of characters on the right, from the right, okay? So again, if we type in 3, it's going to pick up from that string, it's going to pick up APR, which is the 3 most right characters in that string, okay? So if we click OK, and if we just expand this, the width of this a bit more, you'll notice that last 3 characters in that string are APR, which can represent April. Okay, so if we do the same thing for all the other ones, March, August, December, July, Jan, May. Okay, so it's picked up the last 3 characters from the right of that string for us. We can also use something called mid. So whereas right and left return the function, the number of characters from either side, what mid will do is will return from the middle. Okay. So let's type in here. Let's type in another. Let's type in another column name. So Okay, so now let's go into this cell here, and in this cell, let's type in equals mid. Okay, so that's going to use the mid function. Again, we can open the dialog box if we wish to from here. Okay, so in this text box, in this option, in this field here, what we're going to do is we are going to select cell A2, and then here we're going to specify the range that we want to look for. Okay, so here what we can do is we can say mid for, so start from character 4 and look for how many numbers of characters do we want to look for. So for example, 2 characters. Okay, and if we click OK, we'll notice that from this cell here, it's returned 00. Okay, and why does it do this? If we look at this now, it's returned 00. So if we look at the formula, we selected A2, which was this cell here, and we selected 2. So we selected 4 and then comma 2. Okay, so what it's done is it's gone to this cell here, is counted 1, 2, 3, and on the fourth one, it started from the fourth character and it's counted 2. So it's counted 2 characters and it's returned 00. Okay, so the same thing with the other ones, it will return SA. If we change this now, and if we change this number of character, it counts to 3, for example, it will return 3 characters from that point onwards. So that's how the mid function will work. We can also use the trim function. So sometimes there are spaces, extra spaces in a cell. For example, if you pay attention here, let's actually look at doing this. So there's extra spaces in cells. So what the trim function does is essentially removes characters at both ends of a text string. So there is only one argument, text, thus the syntax for the function is trim and then brackets text. So we can do this by, for example, if we type into cell, let's type in first, and let's do last. Okay, so first and last. So to use the trim function, simply type in equals trim tab, and then here we can look for what cell do we want to trim. If we select, say, B2 and click OK, you'll notice that it still returns David. But if we click on this now and look at the function argument in the dialog box, you'll notice that when we selected B2, David has a extra space before the D. Okay, before the first D has an extra space, and what it does is in the preview, it's trimmed that cell for us, and it's got rid of any extra spaces in that cell. So David no longer has an extra space at the start of his name. So again, if we go back on in here and now, you'll notice that where we have David, there's one space and one additional white space uh, here. So what it's done is it's simply just trimmed that for us. Again, if we go into Hamilton and if we add some spaces here at the start and at the end, for example, and if we go into last and do equals trim tab, and let's do it this way this time, and let's select cell C2, you'll notice here in the preview, the cell that we selected, we'll notice that Hamilton has spaces at the front and at the end of it, but once it's been trimmed, it will get rid of those extra spaces for us. And if we click OK, now this looks completely different to this because it's gotten rid of those extra spaces on either side. We can also use the proper function. Okay, so what the proper function will do is it will essentially capitalize the first letter in a text string and any other letters in text to follow any character other than a letter. So let's look into using this. So again, to use a proper function, we can do equal and type in proper tab, and then we can open the dialog box here as well for it. So here it's gonna ask us, so what do we want to apply this function to? So let's select simply David, And again, in the preview, we can see what's going to happen once we click OK. So if you notice here, David, the first letter is not capitalized. Once we click OK, you will notice that the first letter in his name will be capitalized. Okay. So now it's capitalized the first letter in his name. Okay, so that's how the proper function would work. We can also use the upper function. So the upper function allows you to convert text to uppercase. So the syntax is upper, and then you just simply select the cell that you want to make the reference to. Text can be a reference or a text string. So let's look into doing this as well. So let's do some information here, and let's select cell D12, and in the formulas tab, let's select, or let's just do it this way, so equals, and then here we're going to use the upper function, so upper tab, and then what cell do we want to make uppercase? Okay, so for example, let's do J2 here, and click OK, and you'll notice that it has capitalized all the characters in that cell for us. Okay, so that's how that works. You also have lower equals low, which exactly does the opposite. So it puts everything in lowercase, even if the cell that we're selecting is in uppercase. So what we can do is, so for this example, you'll notice here where we have column G, you have some O's and zeros, and you'll notice that the O's are in capital. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert this cell into lowercase. So lower, and then we specified the cell that we want to make into lowercase, and OK. Now you'll notice that where there were capital O's in this string, it has converted them into lowercase. Okay, so that's how that works as well.
Hello.
Yes.
Like that cell G2 that we just did now, instead of doing it outside the cell, can we do it there?
Sorry.
Like what you just did on cell G2, the command. Can you do it on that particular do it on that cell without
You
doing it?
can do it on any cell that you want to. Say for example, I have a, say we have a cell here that
What I
says,
mean is, I think what you are trying to achieve is sort of like data cleaning. Like instead of doing it outside the cell, like do it on that cell G2 itself. Is that possible?
so you're saying can you do it in this cell
Like
here?
what you did, what you did on E13, can it be done on G2 without going to another cell to do it?
Oh, so you're saying can you do it for all the other cells?
What I mean is that no, you are trying to clean up cell G2 and you did it on cell E13. Is that correct?
E13. That was just for the example. That wasn't. You can do it
Yeah.
anywhere you want.
What I'm saying, instead of you doing the example outside the cell G2, can you do it inside the cell G2 itself?
Oh,
Yeah.
so if you can do, can you do equals
Yeah. Okay, that's how to do it.
like that?
Oh, that's my question.
So if we test this out now, see, it doesn't do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's how to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's how you would do that. So that was a lower function, and it converts into lower. And we also have something called concatenate. So in programming, some of you may know this term. So concatenate essentially combines text strings together. And the way that you would do this is, for example, let's have a look at it. So you would do just first and last name. So we're going to concatenate the first name and the last names here. Okay. So what we can do is equals concatenate tab, and here we're going to do is we're going to concatenate the last name and the first name and the last name together here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the first text here, for text 2, we can, for example, in this concatenation, we can add, like for example, a comma between these two words. And for text 3, we're going to select the last name. And if we click OK, so for here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a comma and a space, okay? And if you notice here, it will present you with a preview of how it will look like as well, okay? So if we click OK, it's now joined those two cells together, it's concatenated them, and now we can see the first name and the last name both in one cell, okay? And what we've concatenated is also separated by a comma and a space after that between it, okay? So that's how you would use the concatenation function as well. Any questions?
Hi, Sasan. I wanted to ask about the trim function you mentioned.
Yes.
You showed us that it removes the space. Can this apply to the characters as well, or does it remove only space?
So what do you mean by characters? So can you
I
remove
mean,
like certain
yes, if I
characters?
want to, yes, characters like as if in David, I want to get rid of first D and last D. Can I use trim function for that, or trim applies only to spaces, not the characters?
So the trim function only applies to space. So it's used to,
Okay,
get rid of white space. What
okay,
you call it, white space
okay, but
between
not the characters in the
no.
set. Okay, thank you. That's clear.
Any other questions?
Sasan, one example, you just give example of concatenate. So,
Concatenation, yeah.
okay. So, is there any way of how to put it across? We want to go to reverse of this concatenate function. If
Also
you want
the
to separate these two, for example, David, comma Hamilton, into two separate first name and last name, is that possible, or we just do the CSV files then?
so
The one what we did with the CSV ones.
yeah. So are you saying that the data that you're working with is already been in that format and you want to separate it?
Yes,
So yeah, you would do the
the CSV one,
CSV,
isn't it?
yeah.
Okay, thank you. But let's suppose if there's it just says David Hamilton, there's no comma in between, so it doesn't come under the CSV files. Then how do we separate these two?
Sorry?
So let's suppose you have got a name which says David Hamilton, David
Mhm.
space Hamilton, and if you want to separate these two into separate cells, how do we do that then?
So like how we did previously, so we know if you remember how we did
Sure.
previously, what was we
Okay, I get
selected
it.
the comma as our delimiter.
Okay.
So depending on what your delimiter is, so it can be, for example, a semicolon, a
Or a
dash, or whatever
space.
you want it, you will then specify that that is my delimiter, and then it will look for where the delimiter is, and based on where the delimiter is, it will separate each of those values
Sure.
based on that
Okay.
where that
Okay.
delimiter is.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Did the concatenation, upper, lower, trim, everything make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. But I was thinking, if I've received this file, you just divide it into columns. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say all these tables, and I have to perform all these formulas and make this workbook or sheet separated neatly. So I have to perform all the formulas separate in the where all the cells are empty. So I can't perform the formulas within the cells like in column B or C or D. So I have to.
Well, you wouldn't really do these formulas in
Oh,
these cells because at the
okay.
end of the day, it's not really efficient because that means that you're gonna have to do it for every single one. But in this
Oh,
case, if you just insert a new column and
yeah.
if you just do it for just one of those cells, you can simply just drag it down and do it for, that may be like 100 or 200 or 500 rows. But if you're going to go ahead and do it for every single cell, it's just not going to work. It'll just take you too long to do. So that is not the way that you would do it, and that's not, when you're working with Excel, that's not how you would do it.
Okay.
Because say, for example, if you want to, say you might have like 1 million rows in this worksheet, right? You're not going to go into every single cell and do it for every single cell.
Yeah, true.
Essentially, the quickest way would be to do it for one and then just autofill all of the other columns, and that'll just do it for you straight away.
Yeah. So I have to perform the formula in an empty column. I can't perform even one formula in the top rows of, let's say, A, B, C, D, E, and then copy them or autofill them down. This function is a bit confusing. I mean,
so which function? Which function?
I mean, I can understand all the formulas now, like left, right, middle. But let's say I've received this file and it doesn't make any sense, right? And we have separated with the delimited function. So then, by making sense of this file or sheet, so we have to perform formulas where the empty columns are, where the columns are empty, not actually where the actual data is.
So the thing is with this is, for example, say you want to use the right function here, right?
Yeah.
So here we have some sort of data here in this table, right?
Yeah. Can I use all these functions in the data which you selected now?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So the thing is, for you to be able to use the right function here, when you're using the right function, you're making a reference to a cell.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you go ahead and copy this formula into this cell, you no longer have the data for that cell, and you can no longer make the reference to that cell. Okay. So therefore, you would do it in a separate column or a separate cell that's empty, so you can then make the reference to it. But if you just go ahead and, or if in order for me to do this, I need to delete this, otherwise I won't be able to do the formula. Okay. So you can no longer then make the reference to that cell. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And also as well, so if you were to, for example, say you got rid of the data in this cell and you changed it with a formula, you can no longer then access that data again, because that's been now replaced with a formula. So if you go ahead and now try and use a different function on that cell, you won't be able to do that as well.
Okay.
You just now replaced what data was in that table with formulas that we can't use formulas on formulas.
No problem. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? So guys, all the materials are again in class materials, MX Excel materials, and so today's sessions we covered sessions 9 and 10, and